Good morning, El Pasoans, mostly El Pasoans, or maybe some others watching across the state and country. My name is Steve Ortega. I am a policy fellow with the El Paso Chamber of Commerce, and I want to thank you for joining our second installment of a weekly preview that we're doing with Speaker Pro Tem Joe Moody, giving us updates on what's taking place in the state capitol. This is something that the Chamber started in partnership with Speaker Moody. It will take place every Friday at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time during the legislative session, and we will have Speaker Moody, and in addition, from time to time, we'll have other members of the delegation. Last week, our first meeting, we also were joined by State Senator Cesar Blanco and had an excellent session. So I want to thank you for joining today. If you want to let others know about this, we do have an archive at the Chamber's Facebook page, where in several days, this will be video archived, and you can take a look at this and other sessions that we've done with Speaker Moody. So now I want to turn it over to Speaker Moody. He'll give us 5 to 10 minutes update on what's taking place in Austin. I'd imagine a lot of energy related news. And then if we have time, we will take several questions from the viewing audience. So Speaker Moody, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Wonderful. I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Steve, thank you. And again, thank the Chamber for agreeing to do this. I think it's good for connectivity during session. Well, I kind of jokingly said last week, this is what the week ahead looks like if we're able to travel. So at that point, didn't know what was really going to, what the state was going to encounter over the next several days. So in fact, all of our flights were all canceled out of El Paso to Austin. None of the delegation was able to get to Austin, and we're quite lucky that we weren't able to travel, given the pretty horrendous stories that we're hearing, not just from Austin but from around the state. So it has been a very trying week for folks there. I assume people on this call certainly have family members who have encountered those struggles in Houston, San Antonio, the Rio Grande Valley, North Texas. The stories are coming from all around the state, and quite honestly, the tragic stories are starting to trickle in today, and we'll start to hear more of them in the days ahead. So we'll have to yet another major event and tragedy that we're going to have to navigate. The pandemic certainly was going to absorb a lot of our time, energy, and attention this session. Now with this most recent ordeal, I would assume that we're going to, the bandwidth to take up things outside of energy reliability and pandemic recovery is going to be very low. And so that's something that we're going to have to recalibrate on for the rest of the session. This is one of those events that kind of just changes the dynamic, not just of session, but probably going forward, right? We're going to start to hear, people are now, the power supply is coming back on. You're starting to see people have, their pipes bursting. I've had colleagues that put photos up on social media. Their ceilings collapsed, and they're experiencing the same as anybody else around Texas. And so that's a very real impact that's gonna be felt around the state. We're going to see those types of issues, and then after that, it's going to be, how do you get these things fixed? So the shortage of professionals to be able to fix these. And then after that, it's the insurance claims, and so this is going to be a very costly event on the insurance side of things, and it's going to take time, months to kind of navigate our way through this. So that's where we are. It's gonna really change the dynamic that we're gonna have this session. My hope is that the chest thumping that you tend to see from politicians during this time, during times of crisis, will subside, and we can actually get down and drill down to real solutions. I hope that there's not a hyper politicized response to this, and a more measured, results oriented approach. That's the way I think we should approach it, and hopefully that's those are the voices that'll elevate to the forefront of the conversation. There were a couple issues of note this week and yesterday, El Paso specifics, and I'll get into the nuts and bolts here. So we talked about our committee assignments last week, and one of our members here in El Paso, Mary Gonzalez, was appointed vice chair of appropriations. So the appropriations process is a very involved and intricate one. But as it winnows through session, the players at the table also winnow. So you start with the committee itself, which is, I think, 25 members, 27 members, somewhere in that range. Largest committee by far. And then they appoint subcommittees. So they break out subcommittees, and those subcommittees take chunks of the budget and they drill down. So healthcare, education, you got DPS and TDCJ, and so like corrections and police and public safety and all that stuff. So you have these big chunks of the budget. And so you have 4 main subcommittees that do that. And so Mary Gonzalez was named the chair of one of those subcommittees this week. That usually also then is a predictor of which members of the appropriations committee will sit on what's called the conference committee for the budget. I know I'm getting into the nitty gritty, but this is how how things get done at the end of session. Is there are 5 members from the House, 5 members from the Senate that are appointed to negotiate the differences between the House version of the budget and the Senate version of the budget. So what this is an indicator of is that an El Paso representative will most likely have one of those 5 seats at the table at the end of session, which is critical for us. And I don't recall in my time ever having that level of influence for El Paso at that table. So that's good. It's something that we need to continue to remind ourselves of. With all the challenges we're facing, we certainly do have prominent seats at the table that we're going to have to utilize in tough times like we're in. So that was one event that happened this week. And then the week ahead, I'll put a question mark on it. Appropriations was supposed to start meeting this week, though they pushed that back a week to next week. We were supposed to start referring bills to committees. Bills are start to populate in committees, and that way in the coming weeks we'd be able to start to hear those. None of those bills were referred, so you have 1,000 bills that probably would have been referred this week that weren't. So that step still has to take place. So my guess would be kind of like run that through session. There's probably 3 days of bills that we just killed. They're just gone. We won't have the time to take them up. And so we're going to have to really zero in on what our priorities are, because the time crunch is going to be very real. It was already going to be difficult with the pandemic and having to navigate a little slower. Now we just lost an entire week. And so that's going to be an added complication to, if we're looking to pass bills, that's an added complication. If your goal is to kill bills, then last week was a help to that cause. And so, and sometimes sessions are defensive sessions, right? You just don't want certain things happening. So, and that's okay too. And so we'll just have to reevaluate and reset and figure out what this new session is going to look like. I'll leave it there. Substantively, there's not a lot because of all the events that happen around the state, but certainly that's going to be a big focus. The governor's added some emergency items onto our plate related to the energy reliability issues. So that's one of the other big changes.
Very good. I want to thank you for that update. We do have a couple of questions that have come in, Speaker. And before I get started with the questions, just as a personal note, want to thank you for the hard work done in Austin. I believe in terms of the second term as Speaker Pro Tem, the last time we've had an El Pasoan member of the House and that elevated a position, it was Judge Thomason who served as Speaker. And so want to certainly congratulate you for that. And again, on a personal level, really appreciate that you not only take the statewide perspective and use your office to advance the state's interests, but then you also don't forget that you represent the El Paso community and are always very aware of that. And I'm so proud of you and the work that you and the delegation are doing on behalf of our community, on behalf of the state. So thank you for that. Question that's come in is, in terms of affecting El Paso's priorities, how has the energy crisis this past week, how do you think it's affected our community's priorities as it relates to work that's being done at the Capitol?
Well, we've got many of our priority items are housed in the appropriations process or in the budget. So UTEP funding, Texas Tech funding, El Paso Community College, all these kind of continuity of services, making sure that we have the ability to keep growing those institutions in the way that we need to. So a lot of those are housed in the budget. So in terms of that bill, we know constitutionally is one that we have to pass. So it didn't disrupt anything in terms of those goals within the appropriations bill. But if we're talking about dollars and cents that maybe have been absorbed here, because one of the emergency items was, find funding to pay for, winterization of these facilities. And quite honestly, and I haven't delved into the details of how people want to do this, but if you have companies that have neglected that for years, I don't know why the state coffers should be open to handle something that they refuse to do over years. And I need to delve into this more. We're at the very beginning of this, and we're lucky out here in El Paso. We're not in ERCOT. We confront our own issues here. But quite honestly, after 2011 with the freeze year, there were lessons learned, and there was infrastructure put in to make sure that we didn't have the bad result that we just saw in the rest of the state. And so that takes investment, and it costs money. And sometimes that's unpopular because you've got rate increases come along with that. But so anyway, I kind of navigated away, but I don't think necessarily it's going to disrupt any of our major priorities, unless maybe there was an opportunity to snag funds that otherwise we wouldn't have been able to snag, that are going to be now pushed into this kind of arena. So I would say we're still okay on our priority items for El Paso in terms of timing.
Okay, very good. And one last question, because we do try to keep this to about 15 minutes.
Oh yeah, sure.
You had mentioned ERCOT, which for our viewers that aren't as well versed in energy provision as you are, stands for the Electric Reliability Council of Texas. And most of Texas's big cities, or all of Texas's big cities, are in ERCOT, with the exception of El Paso. We're on a grid that's called WEC. But we got a question. I think it's a good question. How has what happened this week affected how you view El Paso Electric's provision of electricity here in El Paso?
Look, I think that we have something to be proud of, and we should certainly take stock of that. And there were measures put in place at new at the new facilities. There were fail safes put in place so that when we encountered one of these events, we wouldn't suffer the worst consequences. We saw what that looked like when they flipped the switches off back in 2011, and it was hard to get things back up and running. And so I think it speaks to the difficult decisions that we have to make to advance the infrastructure. And we dealt, regionally we dealt with a little bit more complicated situation because we were not allowed to go for rate increases for a very long period of time, and so that created some degradation in our infrastructure as well. So emerging from that, some tough decisions were made to be able to invest in that infrastructure, and it did well for us. And so the lesson here is, investment in these things is a positive, and having a healthy mix of energy resources is a positive. So let's give credit where credit is due, and we should be proud of the way the system performed in this event, because it certainly could have been a lot worse, and we can see it. And I've got family from across state, just like everybody else. You're hearing the horror stories that they've encountered, and so we should be proud of ourselves, and it should be a good lesson going forward for others about, you can't just allow your infrastructure to degrade over time. You just can't. this is why you have to make those investments.
Yeah, and I had a long conversation yesterday, speaker, with our good friend Bob Moore, and he reminded me 10 years ago, El Paso was in the single digits during our freeze. And
Mhm.
what's amazing to me is when you and I were in high school, as you know, El Paso Electric was going through bankruptcy. There was a rate freeze, and we had minimal infrastructure investment from the mid 90s up until about 2010. And so lessons learned, I think, from 2011 and again from this past week is you have to have a diversity of energy sources. I know a lot of very well-intentioned people, including myself, want to have more renewables, but the reality is you also have to have other sources of energy. This past week, 2/3 of our power came from Palo Verde nuclear. And those investments are needed. And so I think we're all on the same page there. Again, I want to thank you for your good work in Austin. We will do this again next week. And I know that you've let me know that you want to invite some of your colleagues in our delegation to participate. So we'll work on that together as well. And again, I want to thank you for your time and your information and your good work on behalf of the El Paso community in the state of Texas.
Awesome. Thank you all very much. Have a great weekend.